Okay, so someone out there wants the deep dive on How to Think Like Socrates by Donald Robertson, right?
Right.
Is it philosophy straight up or more like self-help? Maybe even a bit of history. Let's find out.
Okay, yeah. What's intriguing is how it tackles that question. People have always wondered,
Yeah.
like, what even is wisdom?
Hmm.
And using Socrates' whole life as the example is brilliant because, man, his approach is so relevant even now.
Totally. It's not just some, dusty old philosopher stuff. This book talks about how Athenian democracy was super vulnerable to being manipulated by demagogues.
Well, demagogues.
Demagogues.
Yeah.
Socrates himself, get this, was actually kind of skeptical of democracy too. Worried about speakers just swaying voters with, feelings instead of logic.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you think about our own political stuff.
Oh, yeah, big time. And that's exactly where Socrates' focus on reasoning comes in, right?
Yeah.
And being self-aware, which Robertson connects to, well, all the crazy rhetoric we see now. The book argues those skills are how we defend ourselves against that stuff.
Right. Okay. So to get this, we have to start with Socrates' early life. The book begins with him as a young guy working in his dad's stonemason workshop. I mean, you'd think he'd be all about the chiseling and carving, but no, he's already obsessed with these questions about virtue and living a good life.
It's clever, right? Makes Socrates relatable. He's not just this like super intellectual debating in some fancy place. He's just a regular dude with a job surrounded by sculptures of, get this, the three graces, generosity, gratitude, reciprocity. The book even suggests that that early imagery might have like actually shaped his thinking on ethics.
Interesting. And then there's his buddies, Crito and Chaerephon. They were like his first little philosophy club, always having these intense talks. It fueled his passion, clearly. And they must have been seriously impressed by him because, get this, Crito eventually gives Socrates some land so he could pursue philosophy full time.
Wait, really?
Really? That's huge, right? I mean, he could have ended up just another stonemason.
That's massive. It shows how much those conversations were valued even back then. People recognized the power of thinking critically, even if they didn't, like, call it that. Plus, it makes you wonder, would Socrates have become the Socrates without that help? It makes you think about how circumstance plays a role in anyone's life, even a philosopher's.
Okay, but now, this is where it gets really interesting. So Chaerephon, always the adventurous one, he goes to the oracle at Delphi, the one everyone went to for answers, right? And asks, who's the wisest person alive?
And the answer is,
Socrates.
of course.
But here's the thing. Socrates knows he isn't wise. He's like painfully aware of his own ignorance, right? So this whole paradox is what sets him off on this mission to find someone who actually is wise, someone who proves the oracle wrong.
Talk about a turning point. So it's like the oracle accidentally launched his whole philosophy career.
Exactly. So he starts engaging with these sophists. They were basically like the hotshot intellectuals of the day. They claimed they could teach virtue and wisdom for a price. Kind of like ancient Athenian self-help gurus, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But Socrates, with his constant questioning, he exposed the holes in their thinking. This is where we get the Socratic method in action, and the book breaks it down really well. It's asking those super specific questions to reveal contradictions and those hidden assumptions everyone has. It all leads to deeper understanding.
So it's not about winning the argument. It's about the truth, even if it's, messy or uncomfortable. That's got to be a useful skill to have these days, right? When everyone's shouting opinions without listening or thinking much.
Oh, for sure. And the book is big on this being a skill you develop, not just something you're born with, right? So that self-help element is there, but it's all rooted in Socrates, which makes it so much more, I don't know, interesting.
Okay, so we've got the skeptical philosopher who's also like a self-help guru. You throw in Alcibiades, this charismatic dude full of potential, but also like major flaws.
Yeah.
Socrates sees both sides and becomes his mentor, trying to steer him toward wisdom and being a good person. It's like the ultimate test of Socrates' teaching skills, right?
And their whole relationship is fascinating because Alcibiades is just like anyone trying to be good while also being ambitious, tempted by power. Their first meeting is a great scene. Socrates sees right through him. And later, he actually saves Alcibiades' life in battle, which really cements their bond.
And all this is going down during the Peloponnesian War. This huge conflict between Athens and Sparta. Socrates is in the military, seeing the ugly side of Athenian democracy firsthand, all the manipulation and power struggles. He starts to see how these ideas about virtue and justice play out in the real world with real consequences.
And it's not just theoretical stuff, right? He runs into people like Cleon, a total demagogue who uses public opinion for his own gain. It's almost a history lesson, A&D a warning for us.
Yeah, it brings us to these intense conversations between Socrates and Alcibiades. And later on, another power-hungry dude named Socrates goes after this idea that power equals happiness. He's arguing that even a tyrant with all the power and wealth could be totally miserable if he's unjust.
Whoa, mind blown. It goes against everything our culture tells us about success, right? Socrates is saying real fulfillment comes from being a good person, not from stuff or achievements.
It makes you think about what being truly well means, doesn't it?
Mm.
Like, what are we really striving for in our own lives?
It's a powerful message that resonates across the centuries. Yeah, it really does make you think. It makes you wonder if maybe Socrates was ahead of his time in a way.
Totally advocating for inner fulfillment over all that external stuff, right?
He might have been, but we all know how it ends, right?
Yeah.
Socrates is put on trial, executed, but even facing death, he sticks to his principles. It's almost like he saw his trial as this way to make a final point, you know?
To turn his death into, like, a philosophy lesson.
Exactly. He uses his defense speech not to beg for mercy or anything, but to explain how he lived, to defend his pursuit of truth. It's a pretty strong statement about living with integrity, even when it costs you everything.
And there's that tragic twist too, right? Critias, that ambitious guy we talked about, he actually plays a part in Socrates' downfall.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the wisest people can be victims of circumstance and other people's actions, you know? I'd also underscores how important it is to stay true to yourself, even when you're betrayed.
It's kind of, I don't know, disheartening, but also inspiring.
It is. It's a complicated story with all these layers of meaning, but that's what makes it so gripping.
So you've got this fascinating historical figure, Socrates. But the book is really using him to teach us modern mental skills, right?
Precisely. It's like saying, hey, here's how one of history's greatest thinkers approached problems. What can we learn from his process? And the book does an awesome job of making that process feel relevant to our problems now.
And it does that by highlighting these specific techniques, like that two-column exercise,
Yeah.
where you write down a belief you have and then try to find evidence against it.
Oh, yeah. It's powerful for challenging those assumptions we all have. And our biases, you know, it's like a pre-internet fact check, forcing us to think critically about what we believe and why.
So this book isn't just about learning about Socrates, it's learning to use his mental tools in our own lives.
You got it. It's about becoming more aware of how we think, how easily we're persuaded, and building up that mental muscle, that critical thinking.
Which is probably why Socrates was so suspicious of those sophists, the guys who were all about winning, not necessarily truth.
Right. He saw right through all that fancy talk. He knew that real wisdom isn't about sounding smart or tricking people. It's genuinely wanting the truth, even if it means sometimes admitting you're wrong.
Which is so hard to do. Right? Nobody likes being wrong.
Tell me about it. And that's where the book's focus on self-awareness is so key. Socrates believed that knowing yourself, strengths and weaknesses, was the foundation of making better choices.
Makes sense. It connects to his idea that virtue is knowledge, right? Like if we truly understood what was good, we'd naturally do good.
That's the core of it. But the book does acknowledge it's complicated. Obviously, people do bad stuff even when they know better.
So maybe it's not that people are inherently bad, but their knowledge is, like, incomplete somehow?
Yeah, maybe. They haven't really thought about the consequences, or they're letting their feelings cloud their judgment.
Which is why Socrates was all about poking and prodding, asking questions, getting people to think deeper about why they believe what they believe.
He was like holding up a mirror to your mind, forcing you to see your own biases and assumptions.
So would you say this book is for the philosophy nerd or someone looking for practical self-improvement stuff?
It's honestly both. It definitely goes deep into Socratic thought, but it also gives you those practical tools and exercises anyone can use to think better and live a more, I don't know, examined life.
Okay, so it's got that philosophical depth, but it's also really applicable to everyday life.
Exactly. It's like a bridge between ancient wisdom and our modern problems. It shows how those timeless ideas can help us figure out this crazy 21st century.
It's like a mental gym for your brain.
Love that. It challenges you to stretch those thinking muscles, develop those new habits of mind.
So we've established this book could appeal to, like, a lot of people.
Yeah.
But let's dig a bit deeper into the content. The book talks about Socrates being disillusioned with natural philosophy. Can you elaborate on that?
At first, Socrates was totally into natural philosophy, you know, studying the cosmos, the physical world. He even got hold of a book by Anaxagoras, this famous natural philosopher. But he was disappointed.
Oh. Why? What was missing for him?
Socrates wanted answers to ethical questions like good and evil, right and wrong, that kind of thing. But in Anaxagoras, he was focused on how the universe worked, not morality. It's like Socrates wanted a guide to being a good person, and all he got was a physics textbook.
I get it. It's like reading something super smart, but it doesn't give you any, wisdom.
Exactly. And this is where things change for Socrates. He decides philosophy should be actionable, something you use to live a virtuous life. He wants it to answer questions about how to be good, not just explain the universe.
So this is when he develops his unique approach, focusing on ethics, virtue, self-knowledge.
Right, and that's what sets him apart from the natural philosophers and the sophists. He's not just explaining the world or teaching people how to win arguments, he wants to help them live better lives.
Now that you mentioned living better lives, the book gets into Socrates' run-ins with the sophists, especially Protagoras. Can you tell us more about those debates?
Those parts are awesome. They really show the Socratic method in action. You see how he uses questions to challenge assumptions, expose contradictions.
Give us an example, what did they debate specifically?
One of their biggest debates was about courage. The sophists, like Protagoras, they believed courage was mainly about knowledge and skills. They thought you could teach someone to be courageous by giving them the right info and training.
Yeah, I can see that. The more you know about something, the less scary it might seem.
Right. But Socrates had a different take. He said true courage was about more than just knowing stuff. It was about wisdom, understanding, and aligning your actions with what's actually good and right, even when it's tough.
So for Socrates, courage was linked to virtue, to living a moral life.
Exactly. He thought a truly courageous person wouldn't be brave just because they knew how to fight or whatever. They'd be brave because they understood what was at stake and were committed to doing what was right, even if it meant danger or hardship.
That's way deeper than just knowing how to use a weapon.
Right. And it goes back to self-knowledge, which Socrates was all about. He believed that to be truly courageous, you had to know yourself, your strengths, weaknesses, values, what you were willing to stand up for.
So it's not just conquering outer threats, it's about facing those inner fears and limits, too.
You got it. And that's one reason why Socratic philosophy feels so relevant to us today. We're constantly told what to think, feel, do. But Socrates reminds us to step back, question those messages, and figure out what's true and valuable for ourselves.
Such a powerful message, especially with all the social media and information overload these days.
It is, and the book stresses the importance of developing that Socratic mindset. Questioning, being skeptical, being willing to examine our beliefs, even the ones we really hold dear.
Okay, now, the book also talks about Alcibiades and how Socrates became his mentor. What can we learn from their relationship?
It's a great example of the ups and downs of mentorship. Alcibiades was this bright, charismatic guy, but also impulsive, made bad decisions. Socrates saw his potential, but also his flaws.
So he was trying to help Alcibiades become a better person, a better leader.
Totally. But it was tricky. Alcibiades was drawn to Socrates' wisdom, but also resistant to change. He struggled to live up to Socrates' ideals.
It's that classic mentor-student thing, right?
Yeah,
The mentor sees potential, but the student has to choose to embrace it, do the work.
exactly. And it reminds us that growth and change are messy. They don't happen in a straight line. Even with the best guidance, we all stumble, make mistakes. But those mistakes are how we learn and grow.
And Alcibiades' story is especially sad because he makes choices that lead to his downfall.
Yeah, he betrays Athens, switches sides in the war, and it ends violently. It's a warning about what happens with unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power.
So even with Socrates' guidance, Alcibiades couldn't escape his own flaws.
Seems like it. But it also highlights the limits of mentorship, You can guide and support, but each person has to make their choices and live with the consequences.
That's a sobering thought. Makes you wonder how we would do under Socrates' guidance.
It's a great question to ask ourselves, right? What are our blind spots? What weaknesses are holding us back? How can we cultivate that Socratic self-awareness to make better choices and have more fulfilling lives?
Deep stuff. But that seems to be what this book is about. It's prompting us to think deeply, challenge our assumptions, and keep going on this journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. And it uses Socrates' life as the model, showing how he used philosophy as a way of living, a way to navigate all the complexity of being human and striving for wisdom and virtue.
Now let's talk about another interesting theme. Socrates and Athenian democracy. He wasn't exactly a fan, was he?
Not really. And it's important to understand why Socrates wasn't against the idea of democracy, the people governing themselves.
But he had issues with how it worked in practice.
Big time. He was really bothered by how people used rhetoric to manipulate public opinion and voters. He saw how speakers could appeal to people's emotions, fears, prejudices instead of their reason.
So he was worried about those demagogues, the ones who exploit how people feel for their own gain.
Exactly. And he saw that as a fundamental flaw in the Athenian system. He thought true democracy needed informed citizens, people who could think critically and debate with reason.
He was afraid that without that, democracy could easily become mob rule or tyranny.
Right. The book shows this through characters like Cleon, a demagogue who gets power by playing on public opinion and turning people against his opponents.
It reminds us that democracy is fragile.
Mm.
It needs constant attention. It's not enough to just have elections. Citizens have to be involved, informed, and willing to hold their leaders accountable.
Totally. And that's where those Socratic skills come in. Critical thinking, self-awareness, reasoned arguments, they're crucial.
So in a way, Socrates is giving us a guide to being responsible citizens, to participating in democracy in a way that protects it and upholds its values instead of letting people exploit it.
Exactly. And that's super relevant today with all the populism and misinformation, the way public opinion is manipulated through social media and stuff.
It's like Socrates is giving us a toolkit to navigate all this increasingly complex and, let's be real, deceptive information out there.
You got it. And the book does a fantastic job of showing how those Socratic principles can be used in our own lives to help us make better decisions, have more productive conversations, become more informed and discerning citizens.
So it sounds like this book could be valuable for anyone who's worried about the state of democracy, misinformation, the way rhetoric is shaping public opinion.
I think so. It gives us a timeless perspective on these challenges that haven't gone away and provides real insights into how we can develop the skills and habits of mind we need to deal with these complex issues.
Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about another fascinating theme. Socrates' idea that virtue is knowledge. What did he mean by that?
This is one of his most famous and controversial ideas, right? Basically, he thought that if people truly understood what was good and right, they would naturally act that way.
So he's saying no one intentionally chooses to do wrong. Evil is a result of ignorance.
Exactly. He believed people make bad choices because they don't understand, not because they're inherently evil.
That's pretty optimistic about human nature, but also kind of unrealistic, right? Don't people sometimes choose to do wrong even when they know it's wrong?
Of course, and Socrates knew that. But he argues that even then, there's some kind of misunderstanding going on. Maybe they don't fully grasp the consequences, or they're choosing short-term gain over long-term well-being.
So for Socrates, even bad choices often come from being misinformed or not thinking things through.
Right. He thought if people could see the whole picture, they'd choose differently. And that's where self-knowledge and reasoned examination becomes so important.
It's about developing the ability to step back from our impulses, consider everything, and align our actions with our deepest values and understanding.
Exactly. And that's a process that takes time, effort, a willingness to challenge what we think we know. It's not easy, but Socrates believed it was crucial for living a virtuous life.
The book also talks about Socrates' experiences with the Athenian justice system. He ends up on trial, not once but twice. What can we learn from that?
Those trials are some of the most dramatic and thought-provoking parts of his life. They give us profound insights into justice, the power of rhetoric, and staying true to your principles even when things are rough.
His first trial was during the rule of the 30 tyrants, right? That super harsh regime that took over after Athens lost the Peloponnesian War.
Exactly. And Socrates' refusal to go along with their unjust demands shows his courage and integrity. They order him to arrest an innocent man, Leon, and he flat out refuses.
Even though he knows defying them could get him killed.
Yeah, it's a powerful example of civil disobedience. He's willing to stand up for what he believes, even when it means facing persecution.
It reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to power, especially when it's being abused.
Absolutely. Socrates' defiance of the 30 tyrants is a huge lesson in moral courage and sticking to your principles even when the stakes are high.
It's even more powerful knowing he faces another trial later, this time under the restored Athenian democracy. And that trial, he's sentenced to death.
It's tragically ironic. The guy who defied tyranny is condemned by the very system he was trying to make better.
But even in that trial, he stays true to himself, right?
Totally. He uses his defense speech not to plead for his life, but to explain his philosophy, defend how he lived, and challenge the Athenians to examine their own values and beliefs.
It's like he turned his trial into one last lesson, one final act of philosophical defiance.
It is. And it reminds us that even facing death, we can choose to live with integrity, to speak truth to power, and leave a legacy that inspires others to strive for wisdom and virtue.
It's amazing he consistently chose integrity over his own safety and comfort.
Exactly. And that unwavering commitment to his principles, even facing death, is what makes him such a compelling and enduring figure.
Now, let's explore another key theme. The book covers Socrates' ideas about death. He seems so calm and accepting about his own mortality. How did he do that?
Socrates' views on death are really interesting because they show us a lot about his philosophy and approach to life. He didn't fear death, he saw it as a natural part of the human experience.
But how could he be so okay with something so unknown, potentially scary?
Well, part of it was his belief in the immortality of the soul. He believed that the soul, the essence of who we are, lives on after the body dies.
So for him, death wasn't the end, but a transition to a different state of being.
Right. And that belief gave him peace and acceptance. He wasn't afraid of what came after death because he trusted that the soul would find its place in the cosmos.
That's comforting for anyone who's afraid of dying.
It is. But Socrates' acceptance of death was also about something else. His commitment to living a virtuous life. He believed that if you lived well, if you tried to be a good person and did what was true and right, then you had nothing to fear from death.
So it's like he's saying the most important thing isn't how long you live, but how you live.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message for all of us. Socrates reminds us that death is coming for all of us, but we can choose to make our lives meaningful, however long they may be.
Makes you think about your own priorities, right?
Right.
What really matters in life.
It does. It encourages us to focus on building good character and living in a way that reflects our deepest values.
Speaking of living well, the book also delves into Socrates' concept of eudaimonia. Can you remind us what that means and how it fits into his overall philosophy?
Eudaimonia is Greek, often translated as happiness or flourishing. But it's a deeper concept than just those words. It's about living in harmony with your true nature, living a fulfilling life that aligns with what's good and right.
So it's not just feeling good or having fun, it's about living with purpose and meaning.
You got it. And for Socrates, eudaimonia was totally tied to virtue. He believed that a truly happy and flourishing life was one dedicated to seeking wisdom, justice, and all those other virtues.
So he's saying living a moral life is the key to true happiness.
Yes, and that's a pretty radical idea even today. Lots of people think happiness is about pleasure, wealth, success. But Socrates says those things don't last, they're ultimately unsatisfying. True happiness comes from living according to our values and trying to be our best selves.
Powerful stuff. It suggests we need to shift our focus from outer achievements to inner transformation.
Exactly. And that's what the book encourages us to do, to cultivate those Socratic virtues of self-knowledge, critical thinking, and doing what's right so we can live lives that are both meaningful and fulfilling.
Now, we can't talk about Socrates without talking about his famous way of questioning. The book does a great job showing how he used questions to challenge assumptions, expose contradictions, and guide people towards a deeper understanding.
Totally. Questioning was at the heart of his philosophy and how he lived. He believed that by questioning, we could challenge our own beliefs, break free from dogma, and reach a more nuanced understanding of the world.
It's like he's showing us that real learning isn't passively absorbing info. It's about actively engaging with ideas, asking questions, looking for evidence.
You got it. And it's a process that requires humility, being willing to admit we don't know everything and being open to the possibility of being wrong.
Socrates was known for saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living."
One of his most famous quotes, it captures his whole philosophy. We have a moral obligation to examine our beliefs, values, choices.
So it's not just about getting knowledge, it's about using that knowledge in our lives to become more thoughtful, ethical, self-aware.
Exactly. And that's what the book wants us to do. Cultivate that Socratic spirit of inquiry, ask those tough questions, challenge assumptions, and keep searching for wisdom and virtue.
One thing that really struck me was how the book explored the dangers of rhetoric, especially the kind that manipulates and deceives. Socrates seemed to be really aware of those dangers.
Oh, he was. He saw how rhetoric could be used to sway crowds, stir up emotions, get people to act against their own best interests. He ran into a lot of skilled speakers and sophists who used rhetoric for their own benefit, often at the expense of truth and justice.
And he was especially worried about how rhetoric was used in politics, right? He saw how demagogues could use it to gain power and undermine democracy.
Exactly. He believed that true leadership needed more than just smooth talking. It needed wisdom, integrity, and a commitment to serving the common good.
So he was suspicious of leaders who were all style and no substance, people who could charm crowds but didn't have the moral compass to lead them well.
Right. And he saw that as a threat to democracy itself.
The book gives examples of how Socrates challenged this deceptive use of rhetoric, right? He debated with those sophists who were known for their rhetorical skills, and he showed the flaws in their arguments.
He did. And those debates are fascinating. You see how Socrates used his own questioning style to break down rhetorical tricks and expose the faulty logic underneath.
It's like he's giving us a masterclass in critical thinking, showing us how to spot deceptive language and take apart manipulative arguments.
He is, and that's so valuable today with all the advertising, political spin, and social media posts trying to mess with our emotions and influence how we behave.
It's like Socrates is giving us the tools to be more discerning about the information we take in, to resist manipulation and think for ourselves.
You got it. And the book does a great job showing how those Socratic principles apply to our everyday lives. They can help us figure out this crazy information age and make better, more ethical choices.
So if you're worried about misinformation, manipulative language, or the decline of reasoned debate, How to Think Like Socrates could be really helpful.
I agree. It's a timely and thought-provoking book. It reminds us how important critical thinking, intellectual humility, and a commitment to seeking truth are, even when it's hard to find or uncomfortable.
Okay, now let's shift to Socrates' ideas about the good life. What kind of life did he think was worth striving for?
Socrates' vision of the good life was tied to his belief that virtue is knowledge. He believed that a truly fulfilling and meaningful life was one dedicated to seeking wisdom, justice, and the other virtues.
So it wasn't about getting rich or famous. It was about developing inner excellence and living according to your highest principles.
Exactly. He thought material possessions and worldly success were temporary and not really satisfying. True happiness came from aligning your life with what was good, true, and beautiful.
It's a perspective that challenges our modern obsession with stuff and needing external validation.
It does. Socrates reminds us that the most important things in life aren't things at all. They're the qualities we develop, the relationships we build, and the ways we contribute to the world.
So for him, the good life is about living with purpose, meaning, and integrity.
Yes. And it's a life grounded in self-knowledge, critical thinking, and a commitment to acting in line with our deepest values.
It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others and the world.
You got it. And that's a vision of the good life that's both inspiring and challenging. It reminds us that true fulfillment comes not from what we get, but from who we become.
Now, one of the most interesting parts of the book is how it connects Socratic philosophy to modern cognitive therapy. How does it make that link?
The book draws these cool parallels between how Socrates did things and the principles of cognitive therapy. It highlights how Socrates' emphasis on knowing yourself, challenging negative thoughts, and aligning your beliefs with reality are all key parts of cognitive therapy.
It's like Socrates was a proto-cognitive therapist, helping people identify and challenge their distorted thinking.
He was, and the book does a great job showing how those Socratic techniques can be used for modern challenges like anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues.
Can you give us an example of how Socratic thinking might be used in therapy?
Sure, imagine someone is super anxious about public speaking. A therapist might use Socratic questioning to help them examine the beliefs that are causing their anxiety.
Like, what's the worst that could happen if I mess up? Or is there any proof that everyone will judge me harshly?
Exactly. Those kinds of questions can help people challenge their negative thoughts, change their perspective, and develop more realistic and helpful beliefs.
So it's about using reason and evidence to challenge those irrational thoughts that can lead to emotional distress.
Right, and that's a core principle of both Socratic philosophy and cognitive therapy.
And the book suggests that by developing those Socratic habits of mind, we can become more resilient, more self-aware, and better equipped to deal with life's inevitable challenges.
Exactly. It's about building that inner strength and clarity that comes from knowing ourselves, understanding our thought patterns, and aligning our actions with our values.
So if someone's interested in learning more about cognitive therapy, or just wants practical tools to manage their thoughts and emotions, How to Think Like Socrates could be really useful.
I agree. It bridges the gap between ancient philosophy and modern psychology, showing how timeless wisdom can be applied to today's problems.
Now let's talk about the book's overall style and tone. It's not a dry academic book, is it?
Nope, not at all. It's surprisingly engaging and accessible, even for people who aren't familiar with philosophy. The author, Donald Robertson, has a talent for blending storytelling, historical context, and philosophical insights.
So it feels more like a story, a journey through Socrates' life and ideas, rather than a dense philosophical text.
Exactly. And that makes it much more enjoyable and memorable. You're not just hit with abstract ideas. You're invited into Socrates' world to see how he interacted with people, how his philosophy played out in his everyday life.
And the author throws in some humor and anecdotes, which keeps it from feeling too serious or academic.
Right. It's not just a lecture. It's a lively and engaging exploration of Socrates' life and ideas with moments of wit and humor that make it a fun read.
And the way he uses vivid imagery and storytelling really brings Socrates to life. You feel like you're there with him in the marketplace in Athens, debating with sophists, challenging the status quo, and inspiring his followers to think about life's big questions.
It's like you're getting a front row seat to one of history's most fascinating and influential minds.
Exactly. It's like you're getting a front row seat to one of history's most fascinating and influential minds.
And whether you're like a total philosophy expert or just starting out, you'll come away from this book with a deeper understanding of Socrates, his ideas, and why they still matter to us today.
It really is amazing how those ideas from ancient Athens can still feel so relevant and insightful.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a testament to the lasting power of his philosophy and how it keeps challenging us to think deeper, live more ethically, and aim for that life of wisdom and virtue.
Absolutely.
So, would you recommend this book to someone who might be, a little intimidated by philosophy, or maybe someone who's never really thought about it before? Oh, definitely. It's a great starting point for Socratic thought. It's engaging, easy to understand, and you don't need to know anything about philosophy beforehand.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And it's so relevant to our lives today, right? Socrates was dealing with issues we're still facing: truth, democracy, finding meaning and purpose.
Exactly. And the book does a great job of connecting that ancient wisdom to our modern concerns. It shows how these timeless ideas can actually help us navigate the craziness of the 21st century.
So if you're looking for a book that's kind of a mix of philosophy, self-help, and even a bit of history, How to Think Like Socrates seems like a winner.
I'd agree. It's got something for everyone, whether you're into ancient Greece, personal growth, or just want to be a more thoughtful, engaged citizen. This book's got you covered.
So we've talked about Socrates' life, his ideas, and how this book brings it all together. What stands out to you as the most, I don't know, compelling part of How to Think Like Socrates?
For me, it's how the book presents philosophy as this practical tool for living. It's not just about theories and intellectual debates. It's about using these tools to examine our own lives, what we believe, and the choices we make.
It's about being more self-aware and living more intentionally.
Exactly. And I think that message really resonates with people today. We're all looking for ways to live more meaningfully, and How to Think Like Socrates offers this really compelling guide for that journey.
So it's not just a book about Socrates, it's a book about us.
Totally. It's about understanding the human condition and where we fit in. And it's about using those ancient tools to handle the challenges of modern life.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job unpacking How to Think Like Socrates. We've explored the main themes, how it relates to our lives, and who might find it useful.
I agree. And I hope we've sparked some curiosity in our listeners. If you're at all intrigued by Socrates, by ancient wisdom, or even just the idea of using philosophy to live a better life, I highly recommend checking out this book.
It sounds like a journey worth taking. And as Socrates might say, the unexamined life is not worth living. So go out there, examine your beliefs, challenge those assumptions, and see what insights you can uncover.
That's a perfect way to wrap this up. Thanks for diving deep with me.
It's been fascinating. And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into How to Think Like Socrates. We hope you found it insightful and engaging.